Good evening, Dungeon Masters, I'm Baron Durop. You've heard the advice before, don't overprep. And sure, it's advice peddled by talking heads all over the internet, but it's largely unhelpful. The real question that needs to be answered here is, how much prep is too much? What preparatory notes are absolutely required, and how do you know when you're overdoing it? No good story survives contact with the players, or so the old saying goes. Specifically, it's these player contacting stories which make a game of D&D exist in the first place. So how do we, as Dungeon Masters, prevent ourselves from writing a novel's worth of story elements that we just hope the players will justify? Easy, we don't. A far better prepping strategy is to focus on your NPC's goals rather than the outcomes of those goals. Each non-player character should have their own motivations, which can be referenced as your players interact with them. Framing your notes in this way is not just more lightweight, but liberating of your time, because with just a few notes about the faction's desires, you can create a brainstorming springboard to use as you prep between sessions. This allows your NPC's goals to become more flexible as your players interact with them. Further, and especially for major NPCs, adding 3 or so bits of in-fiction history about why the NPC has these goals to start with provides enough depth to remind yourself of the NPC's goals contextually. This is especially useful when you're prepping a session 6 months in the future and you need some clear reminders about the NPC's details. In essence, everything you need to understand about a complex NPC's motivation should fit on an index card, and only take up a handful of sentences. Additionally, by tracking those contextual points of in-fiction history, you'll have all the reminders you need when your players finally come into contact with them. All required bullet points for a session prep will be right at hand. In addition to terse statements about NPCs or the factions they're members of, also remain terse about any kind of dungeon, environment, or room description when designing dungeon maps or encounter areas. In essence, only highlight the oddity of the environment your players are exploring when compared to the world's status quo. The only things worth mentioning in your notes are the things that make any location unique. Use simple, easy to understand vocabulary to do 90% of the heavy lifting for you, and 1 or 2 adjectives or details to provide any specificity. Saying the word kitchen might seem boring at first, but adding the notes "no knives to be found" and "mold in the dirty sink" gets a lot of dungeon mapping done and doesn't rely on any pre-written read-aloud block text to distract you from your players. Furthermore, using hierarchical oddity highlighting prompts can save you further time when recanting a dungeon room's design. Sectioning off some handful of rooms as flooded, for example, changes the context of all the room's descriptions contained in that area, all while writing as little in your notes as possible. 5 adjacent dungeon rooms described in this way totally changes how other one-word prompts makes an environment feel. Flooded kitchen, mold in sink, no knives, 5 goblins looking for a way to open a food can takes only a dozen words worth of space on paper and creates an easily understandable and extremely deep encounter prompt. I'd like to take a moment to thank this video's sponsor, Describe. If you want to reduce your prep time even further, Describe's database is here to help. Especially handy if you're using a tablet or laptop as your DM screen. Just write down the search term in your prepped material for a Describe prompt, queue up the description on their website, and read aloud the professionally written description for your planned encounter. Describe's database is filled with thousands of pre-written descriptions you can use in your games, ranging from environmental themes, interesting NPCs, spells as they're even being cast, and combat encounter maps with descriptions for each and every detail on those maps. Check out Describe by using the link in the description below, and use the coupon code BARON when you sign up to get 10% off. Now back to the video. It goes without saying that one of the very first skills you'll develop as a dungeon master is adjudicating dice checks. Moreover, what becomes immediately apparent as you develop this skill is that dice check target values are largely fluid. You'll quickly observe you really don't need to settle on hard and fast DC values so much as you just learn to go with your gut in response to the player rolls, and so you know when a player's roll is high enough. It only follows then, so long as you don't ask for specific target numbers before a roll is made, you can rely on your gut to handwave a bulk of these dice checks away anyway, as well as their related mechanics. As a result, making notes about any of these kinds of checks outside of perhaps a dungeon room target DC value is largely a waste of time. Just as an aside here, this dice-based gut check phenomenon doesn't stop with the dice check values. The concept of fudging dice rolls behind a DM screen largely becomes laughable when you can fudge everything else the dice interacts with without the players ever knowing. Not only dice check values, but ability scores, armor classes, and even hit points are all things you can tinker with behind your DM screen mid-flight while you roll your dice out in the open, and continue to build trust with your players while doing so. In essence, you'll know when the ranger makes a survival check, when the barbarian hits the dragon, and the paladin slays the lich, all based on your gut instincts. So because you don't need to focus on taking notes of such things, you can focus your notes on NPC behaviors instead. 5 goblins running away when they hear fighting in the next room is plenty enough to cue up the NPC's behavior in your mind. Any notes involving the goblin's listening skill, stealth, speed, hit points, or armor class are all just not valuable on paper or worth the mental effort to think about. All in all, overprepping really isn't a matter of prepping too much content. Content can always be recycled, saved, and reused at a later time. Dungeon mastering is forever, after all. However, overprepping comes about when you find yourself writing pages upon pages of notes when 3 items in a bulleted list could remind you of all the information you need anyway. Focus on keeping your notes terse, and you'll find they're much more reusable when your players skip an entire floor of a dungeon, or bypass a tribe of ogres in a valley by taking a different route around them. If you'd like to help me make more content like this in the future, please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, Dungeon Masters, and until next time, good night.